Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for sharing part of your holiday weekend with us. On the show tonight, this 4th of July holiday, we look at a word that has had different meanings for different Americans: patriotism, and what it means to some members of the Black community. Officials unveil a long-anticipated monument for Chicago journalist and activist Ida B. Wells. Meet the first Black executive director of the Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum and her thoughts on the legendary president's significance and telling the story of African Americans. And arts correspondent Angel Edo shares details on a new photo exhibit documenting the past and celebrating the future of women in blues. First off tonight, today is the 4th of July, the celebration of the day the great American experiment began 245 years ago. But as we all know, America's history has not always reflected its purported values of equality and justice for all. In 1852, abolitionist Frederick Douglass asked in a speech, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" Today, that history complicates the feelings many Black Americans have for their country, leading some to question what patriotism should mean to the Black American. Joining us are Jimmie Lee Tillman II, author, activist, and president of the Martin Luther King Republicans; Michelle Duster, author, activist, and great-granddaughter of Ida B. Wells; and Alvin Tillery, director of the Center of Diversity and Democracy at Northwestern University. Welcome back. Welcome all of you to Chicago Tonight Black Voices, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to ask each of you this same question, so I'll ask you to keep your answers kind of brief, please. But first, Michelle Duster, what does the 4th of July mean for you?
Well, the 4th of July obviously is the official Independence Day for this country. But I think for African Americans it's a little bit complicated when you talk about what does freedom mean for us.
Okay, and we're going to get into some of those complications, I know. Jimmie Lee Tillman, what would you say the 4th of July means for you?
Following behind that, right now, it means independence, freedom, celebratory celebration as a historian. But like the last guest said, for the Black American, it means something different, but it's not a day not to be celebrated. It's a day to be honored because it's a great country to be in. It's a free country, and it's a great day to celebrate your freedom.
Alvin Tillery?
Well, for me, and I'm descended from men that fought in the Revolutionary War, Black men who got their freedom from fighting in that war. And for me, it is about celebrating the birth of the country, but also the fact that without Black Americans, this country would have failed. Without Black Americans, there would be no democracy to speak of. And that's what I celebrate with my family and my children every year.
So parsing that out a little bit, how does the country's history conflict with these notions of freedom and independence for Black people? Michelle Duster, I'm going to ask you that one first.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, when the Constitution was written, saying that there was liberty and justice for all, some of the people who wrote the Constitution were slaveholders. And so they clearly didn't mean for everybody. And so then you have to wonder, well, who did they mean? And so, just this conflict, even with the people who, quote, founded the country, is something to reflect on. And so that's where the conflict comes from.
And of course, the word itself, patriotism, it has become a charged word as of late. Jimmie Lee Tillman, how have the events of this past year changed your sense of patriotism?
Wow, well, the events of this past year has made my sense of patriotism really strong and resolved. Just to see two groups of Americans, Black Lives Matter and quote unquote mega heights, standing up for what they believe in, argue their rights and principles, because this is America, and America is a free country. But to piggyback on what the last speaker said, if I can, what most people don't realize is that from the birth of this country, the Black American has played such a tremendous point. From Christmas you have George Floyd, but when the country started, we had Christmas Adams. People don't realize the country went to war just to find independence on the death of a Black man. Phyllis Wheatley, the great poetess, wrote inspiring letters to General George Washington to keep the fight up. You see, the problem is our true history is not being told, and we are sitting around here with this victim mentality, not knowing that in the beginning of this great country, Black Americans was right there from the beginning. We was not all enslaved or all indicted, all under servitude.
Alvin Tillery, do you think some people appropriate the word patriotism in this country?
Well, I don't think it's appropriated. I think patriotism, which at its base just simply means a love of country. I think patriotism means different things to different people. I think the kinds of patriotism that Black Americans have historically elevated is a love of country when that country did not love them. And that is the highest level of patriotism that I think has ever been reflected in our nation. I'll also say that the kind of patriotism that Black Americans, like Michelle's great-grandmother, articulated was a patriotism that was inclusive of all persons. And the dilemma for Black Americans is that they actually were victimized despite their patriotism. And so, sort of what it means to Black Americans, people like my grandfather who went on a ship to fight the Japanese in the Sea of Japan in 1942 at 16 years old, he was fighting against the Japanese, but also against Jim Crow, that double victory, right? And so we're the only group that had to pay that kind of wage. Patriotism for a lot of Americans is just a rallying cry around symbols like the flag or an ideology to discipline others. And so that's the kind of patriotism that I think is too normal and should be discouraged, frankly, in my view.
Michelle Duster, for you, how do you remain patriotic, yet knowing the country's history of racism and treatment for Black people?
Well, the way I think about it is that it's possible to live in a country and have great respect for the country and appreciate the fact that we have so many different freedoms and opportunities, but at the same time realize that there is still room for improvement and there is still room for change in order for the country to live up to its true potential of what it's supposed to be, what the idea of America is. That is in my opinion, has not been fully realized. And I think that should be a good thing to want to grow as a country, to grow as a society and continue to change and become as inclusive and available for everybody to enjoy opportunities as much as they possibly can. And so to me, patriotism is love of country, but also pushing the country to be its best self.
Jimmy Lee, do you think that Blacks occasionally, based on all that we've said and all that we've heard, do Blacks sometimes view patriotism or a sense of duty to the country differently than other communities?
It all depends on which age generation that you deal with. My grandparents went to the service. A lot of Black Americans' parents went to the service, and they looked at America different from the generation of the 60s or the 70s that were taught that this country is not your country, or this white man's army is a white man's army. It depends on the generation that you have. But there's a lot of Black Americans that are proud of this country, no matter what this country has did to them. It's just that most Black Americans have a different way of expressing that patriotic symbolism. When we see Michael Jordan or LeBron James represent the United States of America playing basketball, every Black American is a patriot. Everybody has a flag out there. It all depends on what we see.
Well,
when most black.
sorry, I just want to jump in because we're running out of time. But Alvin Tillery, speaking of generations, how should children be taught about this history and patriotism in a few seconds?
Well, they should be taught the real history of America. And that real history is that, yes, blacks under Jim Crow and slavery were victimized. They continue to be victimized. Yet they were also patriots. Yet they were also founders. And so obfuscating from those facts will just lead to the kind of miseducation that motivates far too many people in our politics today. And so they've got to be taught the real truth.
That is where we'll have to leave it. Happy 4th to the three of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Michelle Duster, Jimmy Lee Tillman, and Alvin Tillery.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy 4th.
Local public officials and dignitaries were on hand in Bronzeville last week to dedicate a new monument to a woman whose legend looms large in Chicago. That of black journalist, publisher, and anti-lynching crusader Ida B. Wells. Wells took great risks to expose the horrors of racism and fight injustice through her investigative journalism and civil rights advocacy. The monument, called Light of Truth, was designed by Inglewood-born sculptor Richard Hunt, and it's located on the site of the former Ida B. Wells homes in Bronzeville, and is said to be the city's first monument dedicated to a black woman. Here's some of what was said at that dedication ceremony.
Her anti-lynching activism became so powerful and so moving that, of course, white folks rose up and exiled her from Memphis in 1892 and kept her away from the South for over 30 years. But she found a home here in our city, in Chicago, and we claim her as our own. She came here making sure that she would have the necessary work to continue demanding change and advocacy on behalf of black people, and yes, she did.
She provided the template for not being worried about yourself, but being worried about the truth and understanding that powerful people have never wanted us to know the truth. They've never wanted us to understand how the levers of power are used against us. And that truth, as she said, is the way that we right the wrongs of our society. So as we commemorate Ida B. Wells Barnett, the baddest chick, I hope that today we can remember her legacy, but also that we are reminded of our own duty to carry on her fight.
The baddest chick. We'll have more on the Wells Monument and renowned sculptor Richard Hunt, who designed it, on next week's Chicago Tonight Black Voices. And make sure to watch our Chicago Stories documentary on Wells and explore the companion website at WTTW.com/Ida B. Wells. Up next, Phil Ponce and the new leader of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in a conversation recorded on the director's first day on the job early last month. Stay with us.
For more than a decade and a half, the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum has worked to tell the story of the nation's 16th president. It's both a research library for scholars and an educational institution open to the public. Recent years have been a little bumpy, though, with the departure of a state historian and executive director and debates over the authenticity of a high-profile artifact, a stovepipe hat. Today marks a new era for the institution. It's the first day on the job for its new executive director. Joining us now is that new leader, Christina Schutt. She's a Missouri native and was most recently director of the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, which celebrates African American history and culture. Christina Schutt, welcome to Illinois. How was your first day at work?
It was excellent. I got to meet with some of the staff today, as well as welcome busloads of visitors and school children that we've had visiting us. So it was a great first day.
You grew up in a family that valued learning deeply. Tell us about that family culture.
Absolutely. In our family, education was and is the way in which we've not only bettered ourselves, but helped better our community. And, someone who understood that quite well was my grandmother, Frida Wright, who integrated her university. And she did that because, again, she wanted those opportunities for herself, for her community, and ultimately for her family that would come along later.
It's interesting that as an historian, I understand that there was, you had a teacher once who told you to forget about the textbook and write your own history book. What impact did that have on you?
Oh, that had a huge impact on me because it helped me understand that history is not just some faraway foreign place that we visit, but history is alive, that history is something that we can be engaged in, and that understanding our history helps us to understand the world in which we live in now and help us to make informed choices about the world we want to live in. So having that kind of hands-on history is something that I'm personally passionate about and something that I hope to not only really continue, but to grow here at the museum.
And what attracted you in the first place to the Lincoln Library and Museum?
Well, I think you don't get very many opportunities to get to talk about, to reimagine, to rethink. Someone who there's, I think, over 15,000 books written about Lincoln. And so the opportunity to really talk about him in a fresh new way, in a relevant way for our public is just hugely exciting. And so when I got the call, I immediately said yes at this chance.
And what is your vision for the institution? What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think core and central to my vision really is about welcoming the community, helping to really center Lincoln in the context of not just who he was at the time, but who he is for us today. What do Lincoln's words mean to us today? How have we tried to embody things like, understanding our better angels, right? How do we think about Lincoln and how do we think about the impact that he had, but also the impact that those in his circle, those around him had on him and, again, the world in which we live in today.
As we mentioned, there have been some ups and downs in the museum's history. In terms of bringing stability to the institution, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, all I can do is speak from my experience. At Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, I was the 5th director appointed there and the 14th change in leadership for the staff. And so I understand firsthand some of the challenges that are involved in moving forward with that pass. But I think one of the things that the staff have really shown particularly over the pandemic in the last year and a half, is their willingness to work together, their energy and excitement to move forward. Even in the middle of the pandemic, they were creating exhibits. We just recently opened State of Sound, and it's a fantastic exhibit, which they did in the midst of a very trying and difficult season, not having an executive director and also in the midst of, a pandemic. And so I think we're all ready really to move forward together and to think about what does this museum and what can this museum mean for the community of Springfield, but also for the state of Illinois and for the nation as we think about our 16th president.
One of the things that we mentioned at the top of the segment was the controversy over the stovepipe hat. Just give us an update. What is the latest? Was it or was it not Lincoln's stovepipe hat that you have?
Well, there was a report that was done, and it's my first day, so I'm just kind of getting to scratch the surface of some of that stuff. I know that there is kind of a committee that's working on that, but as always, we'll keep the public updated as that information comes to light and as we learn that from textile experts and people in the community.
A big item going on display this month is the Juneteenth, as part of the Juneteenth celebration. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we'll be displaying one of the original, super rare copy of the Emancipation Proclamation that, as you know quite well, was a document that Lincoln signed that freed enslaved people in states that were in rebellion against the Union. And so that was hugely important to our country and to the Civil War and the war effort. And so we'll be displaying that, but also we've got some great programming lined up that you can check our social media channels to find out specifics. But again, helping to interpret that, to talk about that, to talk about the relevance for people here today. I'm particularly excited about our Underground Railroad program coming up, I think, in the next couple weeks. So it's definitely going to be something you don't want to miss.
And you are the first African-American person to head the institution. Does that inform how you are going to approach the job in any way?
Sure. Well, I always say that when I come to work, I bring all my identities with me. So I bring my womanness, I bring my blackness, I bring my degrees, I bring all the ancestors, as we would say in the Black History Museum community when I come into work. And so in terms, for me, I think growing up in a situation where I didn't see myself represented in museums, I didn't see people who looked like me, it's always encouraged me and inspired me to look around and see, well, what stories aren't being told? What history hasn't been shared? And how can we bring that into our institution? How can we bring that community to be a part of the museum, to be part of the story that we're telling about really American history, because that's what we're doing, right? It's not just African American history or Latinx history or Indigenous history, right? It is American history. And so how can we tell that in a bold and new way?
Christina Schutt, thank you so much for spending part of your first day with us. Congratulations and all the best to you.
Thank you so much.
And back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this.
As murals and music festivals continue to honor a music genre that calls Chicago home, a traveling photo exhibit is making sure certain artists receive their recognition as well. Arts correspondent Angel Edo shares how one photographer is using snapshots of time to pay tribute to women of the blues.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's what Lynn Orman Weiss's traveling photo exhibition, Women of the Blues, is on the road to share. How female artists have contributed to one of the most influential music genres.
Chicago is, I would like to say, sort of the portal. It's a significant city for women of the blues.
This collection of historic snapshots is 6 years in the making and features more than 100 women, including Koko Taylor.
Koko Taylor, being our Chicago queen of the blues, played such a significant role in influencing and empowering the voices of the next generation of women. And she was my inspiration for this show.
The blues is what she loved. The blues is what she lived, but not how she lived.
Taylor's daughter, Joyce, agrees and says her mother, who grew up in the church and started as a gospel singer, remained true to herself and her faith while working with blues legend Willie Dixon.
Even in the making of Wang Dang Doodle for her, she refused to sing it because it was a lot about like the Dirty Dozen. And my mother said, I just can't sing that song. And Dixon said, you just don't understand. And she said, well, some of them words you got to change because I just can't sing that.
Also featured is up-and-coming artist Melody Angel, who says learning this history is imperative to her development as an artist.
Not only are you honoring the genre, but you're honoring the people who created it. Because for me, learning about my history, learning about music history, built me up in such a way. My self-esteem was built up by knowing that I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived and they invented and created things that we all love today.
You were a little girl when, really.
Yeah, you were little, honey.
Good to see you, boo.
From Chicago to St. Louis to Memphis, this exhibit not only celebrates artists who've laid the foundation for the genre, but also the photographers who have documented these musical celebrations across the country for decades.
we're usually in the pit right now, starting today at Blues Fest, elbow to elbow, camera to camera, lenses to lenses, shooting these remarkable women. So I wanted to give a voice also to the photographers because I'm one of them, and everybody captures the essence of the performer differently. And it's really, it becomes this beautiful narrative on who they are.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And visit our website for more information on how to see Women of the Blues. The exhibit just finished its run at the Delmark Records Gallery and has a few stops before heading to Bronzeville this fall. There, you'll also find more about the featured artists and the photographers behind their pictures. And that's our show for this Sunday night. Be sure to check out our website for the very latest from WTTW News and join me tomorrow on Chicago Tonight. A protest or a riot, how different Americans view the same event and their national identity. And a global campaign wanting people to go plastic-free this July. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for sharing part of your holiday weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.